Welcome to the Strong Roots podcast. It's all about interviewing everyday, ordinary Christians who have strong roots of faith and then applying it to our own lives. Whether you are seeking, whether you're new to faith, or maybe you've been following Jesus for a really long time, come grow strong roots with us. Hey, Strong Roots. We are talking about idols, and today we're talking about pride. And I'm here with Aleah, and she'd be the first to tell you that this is something that she still struggles with. I still struggle with. We are still gripping tight to Jesus, trying to choose him over our pride.
Right.
But I have seen her time and time again throw off and down the idol of pride and choose Jesus in so many areas of her life. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so the first question I have for you is, Aleah, what have you believed about being self-reliant that is not true?
I feel like this answer is kind of vague, but that I can just do it on my own.
Yeah.
That I don't need anybody else, that I've got it.
Yeah. How has that served you?
Awful. Super poorly. I feel like whenever I rely on myself, I feel like I'm hurting myself, but I see it hurting relationships as well. Because it's such a self-focus on myself that I'm not really thinking about how it's going to affect others on the way God is calling me to love others. And I feel like it's putting up this shield of, because I'm being prideful, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to look like I don't have it. And it just is like this tumble effect that just continues to hurt myself and other people. And yeah, it's just an awful domino effect, essentially.
Right. Can you give an example of a recent time or a time that comes to mind where you're like, oh, I chose my own self-reliance over relying on God?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think the very first thing coming back to me is getting feedback.
Yeah.
That's a hard one, especially if it's on like your character or something that you're doing. I'm trying to think of what the specific feedback was, so it's more helpful.
I have one.
Yeah,
Do you want me to like?
Yeah.
Maybe it'll spark what?
Right.
So anyone who knows me knows I struggle with being late. So yesterday, John and I have sermon writing time every single Tuesday.
Yep.
And our time is from 11 to 2:30. And we've had constant discussions, if you want to call it.
Yeah.
Like, hey, when I get there, this is my time. Like, this is a meeting, this is scheduled. And I'm always like, I'm sorry, this thing happened, or cameras were down, or there's always seems to be something. And all that to say, yesterday, I think it was yesterday,
Yeah.
he was like, I can't even remember what he said, but he pretty much was like, you being late is hurting me and hurting others and makes me feel like you value yourself over you value our time. I'm not lying, I teared up because I was like, but I do value you.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But I do know that this is a big issue in my life.
Right.
And I hear you when you're saying like feedback is hard because I think it's not hearing it. It's my fear of like, what if I can't change?
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I want to change. I want to get better. But I think sometimes, I don't know if this is going off high, but I am afraid that I look stupid and I'm going to keep continuing to fail and fail and fail. Do you feel that way too?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where pride comes in, because I don't want to fail.
Yeah.
So then I'm trying to cover it up even more.
Yeah.
Which then just is worse.
Or the lie, like, don't you see I'm trying so hard? Don't you see like the pride of like, I'm doing all these other things for you. I'm putting out all these other fires for you. Like, Don't you realize that the reason I'm late is because like XYZ?
Yes.
And like, I become self-focused. Like, instead of acknowledging the hurt that I've caused him, I'm being prideful in like, well, you don't even know.
Right. And I think for me, it did spark a memory of like getting feedback on my leadership. I think the first thing that I wanted to jump to is why it was all their fault.
Yep.
And like, well, you did all these things, and this is why I reacted in this way. And really, when I got to the bottom of it, it was my poor leadership on being able to lead and steward that person well, being able to ask the right questions, being able to see what they needed in that moment, that like it really humbled me. But as soon as I got that feedback, I was just like, well, you make it so I can't lead you well, and that's not the truth.
Right.
Like, it's all my fault.
Well, how often do you feel like pride? I love this, because how often do you feel like pride actually limits your ability to receive feedback and become a better person?
Oh, 100%.
Why do we take, because you want to be a better Christian, you want to be a better leader, you want to be a better wife and mom, but like, what do you hear in your head that like makes that the bait of being prideful so enticing in the moment?
I think for me, it's almost, I know this sounds bad. I don't even want to say it out loud, but like, you're better than them.
Yeah. Yeah. I know best. I am better.
Yep.
Like it's, we're talking about the idol of pride, but almost worship of self.
Yep. But isn't pride, I know best? I mean, that's like a little, I feel like it's like the little caveat of like,
I know better than you. Yes.
Yep.
But it's so destructive. And I think the enemy knows that it's going to hinder our growth in Christ.
Yep.
That was so good.
So true.
So what is God's truth? Like, what does God say we should do instead of be prideful?
Rely on him.
Yeah.
I think humility is literally the opposite of pride. And if we can't humble ourselves, we can't come to God. And I know there's a ton of times he's still doing it, but where he's humbled me and he's allowed to work in my life then, if that makes sense. I feel like when pride is in, I was talking about that wall being up for relationships. I think even with our relationship with Christ, like I put up a wall that I don't allow him to come in and work and speak through me and tell me what he's thinking. I put that wall up, and I'm being disconnected from God and what he's trying to do and the way he's trying to grow me closer, or the way he's trying to have me love others.
How do you humble yourself? Like, what are ways that you specifically posture yourself to be humble? And what are ways that you have seen God just intervene and humble you himself?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times in my head, these are my combos with God. I'll just go to him and I'll pretty much just start off by complaining of why I think I'm right.
Yeah.
And then it's like that still small voice in your head that's like, you really think that's true?
Yeah.
And then I get super convicted, and it's like, oh. And I think even asking God, will you change my heart and help me see my part in this? Because I know that the only person that I can change is me.
Yeah.
And I think when I get to that point of I confessed, now I'm coming before God and asking him to show me, that's when he shows me where I'm at, and he's able to speak in my life, because he's always there. And he'll do it. But if we're putting up that wall and not allowing him to and just ignoring him, he doesn't always necessarily force himself upon us, though there are times that he definitely, I've got a good smack on the side of the face.
Yeah.
That I'm like, ooh, I needed that one. But
I feel like he humbles me by, I just keep digging my hole. Like I keep talking about how I'm awesome or how I'm right. And it's just like, keep going. Keep going. Because in a second here, I'm about to humble y'all. Because you're going to realize how wrong you are. And you just feel gross.
Yep.
It's just God in us. It's like, you can't last that long until you're like,
right.
It's like, what does Pastor say? Like, sin is chocolate milk, and sin expires.
Yeah.
It's fun to be prideful in the moment. It feels good.
Right.
To think that you're awesome.
Yep.
But then it only takes a little bit till the Holy Spirit convicts you, and you're like, it's worse. It's worse.
Yep.
And then you got to go back and make it right, which is great. And you have to practice humility to be able to do it.
Right.
But in your experience, you talk to a lot of people and a lot of women. Where do you feel like we struggle with pride the most?
That's a great question. You could correct me if I'm wrong here. Maybe this doesn't make sense because it's a different thing, but forgiveness I think forgiving others and walking that out, because we just have this pride of, they did this to me, they said this, I can't forgive them.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And that pride is blocking them forgiving that person and healing that relationship.
Absolutely. I think you're right on. Where do you feel like you're the most prideful in your marriage?
I think it's me being right.
Yeah.
I think I want to be right in our marriage, even with Ellie. Like, there are things that I want it done a certain way, and I want to follow this schedule and how she's raised or what's being said to her. And like, there are different ways that are still good and in the context of a godliness, but sometimes I just want to control Jay and just be like, no, it's supposed to be this specific way. And then it hurts our relationship because he's like, do you even trust that I'm a good dad? And I know he's the best dad. Like, he's amazing. But the more I do that, the less he feels that I actually believe that.
Absolutely. Where have you seen God's ways be better than your ways in your life?
So many ways. My whole life. Right. That's not an example, but man, I think the biggest is relationships.
Yeah.
I think God really knows what he's talking about when it comes to sin and being humble, and how much it'll bless our relationships with each other and him. And when I realize like how sinful I am and how prideful I am, and I'm willing to lay that down at him, it just causes the barrier to go away, that I could grow in him and I can love others well and meet them where they're at and not judge them or think that I'm better than them or not do whatever God is calling me to do. Because as we know, like, Jesus came to serve others. Right. And when we're prideful, we can think, oh, that's below me, or that person, I'm not going to talk to them because of blank. And it just, it ruins it.
Oh, it does. So how do you combat pride? Like, what are things that you do in your everyday life to fight the sin of pride and the idol of pride?
I mean, definite number one, going to God in prayer and reading the Bible. I can't remember what the scripture is. I don't know if it's in First John or something else. I'm awful at remembering where things are at, but it talks about how the Bible is pretty much essentially for us to have that reflection and like grow us and have us to become more like Christ. But I think that's the biggest thing. And then my mentor, which is you, like coming to you in confession. I mean, I'm sure you could probably say how many times I've come to you with a situation, but I feel like even you pointing me in those moments where I've had a hard time, even admitting it. But I know coming to you that I'm wrong, and I don't want to admit that I'm wrong, right? That I know you're going to point me to Christ and the truth. And I think obviously going God and praying, asking him to change your heart, but then going to others too. Like if you're not doing that step and having them hold you accountable, I feel like is super important, because it's easy to slide it under and convince yourself like why you're right, why it's okay. And I feel like the more you do that, the more it's just going to fester, the more they're going to build up, the more you're going to have resentment. And then it's going to become harder to practice. I mean, there was a season in my life where I became super prideful, and like I had to be called to the mat and like super confronted, and it was hard. Like it was probably one of the hardest seasons in my life where I didn't really see that I was becoming prideful. Like, and I could see it coming now, and it's still hard to deal with, but I feel like that season I just blocked it out, and I was hurting so many others, and it just was not a good place to be in. Right.
What did you learn in that season? Like how did you come out stronger and more like Christ?
I think what I just told you, like relying on others to speak into your life and give you feedback. I think that's a huge thing, because I don't think that's something that a lot of people have that grow you closer to Christ, because it's that iron sharpens iron. Yeah. And I think that really does happen. And when you're not having that happen in your life, it's just so easy to fall off and convince yourself. I mean, because the enemy is just talking in our ears so loud.
Oh, yeah. And I think we want a lot of people to avoid Like if there's going to be conflict, if there's going to be any kind of confrontation, I'm just going to run away and avoid.
Yep.
And we are missing out on the growth opportunities that Christ has for us because, I mean, I even got texts today and I was like, oh,
Yes.
I don't want to respond. I don't want to call him.
I know that.
And it's like, okay, but it's a blessing. If I'm going to be confronted,
Yep.
great.
Yep.
I can't wait to become a better Christian and a better friend and a better leader. Like, and even if it's, I'm going to be able to live out my faith in a better way or, you know, model Christianity and apologizing and humbling myself with them,
Right.
you know, as long as I'm leaning into Jesus and not getting defensive,
Right.
right? Like, I think now one of my biggest fears is not the actual confrontation. It's not being humble with it. Like now when I go into work, I'm like, God, whatever comes my way, help me to listen
Right.
humbly and receive feedback without having a hard heart. Because like
good.
what I don't want to do is get defensive or build a wall.
Right.
Or like think I'm right and just sit there blankly and be like, you know?
Right.
Right? Like I want to hear God's truth through others. And
Right.
I want to trust Jesus in other people.
Yep.
And even people who aren't Christians, God can use them to refine us too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And,
Yep.
and I say this all the time, but all trials are good in Christ.
Yep.
But I think to your point, we spend so much of our lives trying to avoid them. And we are stunting our growth as Christians by avoiding the process of humility.
Yep.
So girl, in what area of self-reliance has been the hardest to give to God? And why is that?
Probably leadership,
Yeah?
I think.
Yeah, I'm going to throw back here, but was not being able to get pregnant, was that a hard one? Or was that not as hard as leadership?
No,
Why is leadership the hardest?
because I think it's super humbling.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I always tell God, I'm like, I'd just rather not be a leader so that I don't have to deal with this. And like, that's just
Not
stupid.
true.
That's just stupid. It's not true. Like, it's good things to grow me closer to Christ, but it puts me in a position where I'm faced with being confronted a lot more, where I have to humble myself a lot more, where I have to lean on Him in areas that I don't really know. And I think it's hard for me, being confronted in those ways because I don't want to hurt others. And I think my tendency for me, because I don't want to hurt others, is like, it's lying. Like saying the truth in a way that's like just skirting it enough a little bit that like it's making me look good, which is like that form of pride. Like, here's why I did this, or here's why I said this. And it's a piece of the truth, but it's not the whole truth. And it's not a true submission of humility to Christ.
Yeah.
It's that pride of, I want to look good and I want to be right and I don't want to fail others. So I'm just going to give this little piece of truth.
And I love that you said that because then it's not a true confession
Right.
either. Because if you're talking about confessing sin and I'm like, well, you know, I think that maybe I blue. No, I straight up lied.
Right. Absolutely.
And there's not freedom in the twisting. That's not a confession.
Nope.
That's not being honest.
Yep.
And you are being prideful because you're afraid of this person more than you're afraid of God.
Yep.
Or even confrontation. Like, if you're not truly like, hey, here's this thing in your life. I love you. I want to call you out. If you're like, well, maybe there's this and sort of, kind of.
Right.
That leaves them confused.
It does.
And God is not a God of confusion.
Nope. And you saw me pause. I mean, I wanted to not admit that it was lying.
Yeah.
There was a part of me that pride was just creeping up and I was like, you know better. But like that right there.
And it feels so good to God to like have that true, like confession is so key to Him and to others. And I want to touch on the part where you said being a leader, like, oh, if I wasn't a leader. I think it's so interesting because there was a long time ago, and maybe I've shared this, John was a youth pastor. We got married. He's like, girl, you need to clean up your Facebook. And I was like, because I just became Christian.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to. those are my pictures. I don't
Right.
want to clean it up. I don't want to delete them, or I don't even want to hide them. Why do I have to do this? And John was trying to like lovingly lead me to like, hey, here's the reason why. And I'm like, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Pride, I shouldn't have to. And then I had a conversation with God, and I was like, God, if he wasn't a youth pastor, I wouldn't have to do this. I just wish that that wasn't a requirement. And that still small voice was like, girlfriend, you're a Christian. You should be cleaning up these pictures regardless of your husband's position.
Yes.
And I was like, you're right. It's not a leadership thing. It's a Christ follower thing.
Yep.
Is it like...
And that's a better way to put it.
No.
No, that's true. It is.
It was his words, not mine. It was one of those times where I've never forgotten. Because I will fall into that trap. Like, if I just wasn't... He even campus director. But just wasn't pastor's wife.
Right.
I could do X, Y, Z. No, I couldn't.
Nope.
No, I couldn't.
Right.
And it's such a lie from the enemy.
Absolutely.
To get us to not truly live the life and be obedient to Christ the way we're called to live.
Right. And I feel like it's a way just to hide in the shadow and kind of excuse our sin, so to say. Like, because I'm not leading, because I'm not whatever, this is okay.
Right.
And it's not. Like, you said it perfectly. Like, if we say we are followers of Christ, are we doing it with every area of our lives? And are people looking at our lives saying, man, like, what is so different about those people? Or are we blending in with the world?
Absolutely. And I think pride is the thing that gets us to not truly submit to God's ways.
Absolutely. And I mean, Satan, this is his world, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, of course, pride is going to be something that he just dangles over all of us. Like,
it's annoying.
Very.
So, Aleah, anything that you want to ask me when it comes to pride?
Yeah. What's been, I don't know, your biggest struggle in pride, and what have you tangibly learned from that and grown closer to Christ in because of it?
The thing,
that's
pride. No, but pride is so prevalent in so many areas, so it's hard.
Right.
I feel like the thing that I've learned most about pride is if it keeps me focused on myself. And it keeps me from the greatest commandments, loving God and loving others.
Right.
I am not living out my God-given purpose when I'm being prideful.
Right.
And I'm missing out on all that God has for me. And annoying is
Yeah.
because I'm being it feels good in the moment to be self-focused and think only about me and want to justify why this happened, but it's so unfulfilling and it doesn't bring life, and it keeps me from truly living out the Great Commission.
Right.
And I think it has been such a spiritual discipline. Like, I can be a really great listener, but when I'm listening to somebody telling me all the reasons why I screwed up, or even in my marriage, like how I've hurt John, I literally want to cut people. I want to cut them off.
Right.
And I want to justify myself. And I literally started counting from 30, 29, 20, just because I am so not self-controlled in that area right now in my life with pride that I want to like cut them off and tell them why and like justify. And I'm like, no, you're not.
Right.
Like, God values his side just as much as he values mine.
Right.
And like, I want to like truly see his point of view because it matters.
Right.
And if I'm supposed to love him like I love myself, then I need to care. Like, and I love myself, then I need to like really listen.
Right.
And not be thinking of all the reasons why I'm going to debate him and why he's wrong, but like actually listen to him the way I hope he listens to me.
Right.
And I'd say that is the thing that I currently struggle the most. Specifically, marriage is a reflection of your deepest, like, it's just a magnifying glass of like where you're really struggling the most. And I think honestly, putting little things into practice, like maybe the counting down from 30 sounds really silly, but it is the only way I have found that I have not got my husband off.
Right.
I'll be calm with Jesus. You know what I mean? But it is so cool to see him bless little acts of obedience. We're just little kids. He's like, hey, I see you.
Right.
Counting for me. Like, thank you, girl. Like, to you being a good listener.
Yes.
And dying to yourself and dying to your pride.
Yep.
So thank you for asking.
Yeah.
It's such a great question. And thank you for speaking so beautifully and eloquently on pride. Like, I can't wait for everyone to listen to this and hear your words. And as always, we want to leave you with a tangible thing to walk away with. And so I think it'd be super helpful to pick an area in your life. Where do you struggle with pride the most? Is it in your leadership? Is it at work? Is it in your marriage? And get silent with God.
Right.
Confess it to Him. Confess it to another godly person. And actually let down your walls and let them speak truth to you and how you could become more Christ-like in that area. I think that would be so helpful. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I cannot wait to catch you next time. Bye, Strong Roots. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Strong Roots podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure to check us out on all our other social media platforms. And I want to let you know that I am personally praying that your roots stay strong.